How you doing? This is Chris Feehan from the Empire City Garrison in New York. I'm starting today doing some trimming of my Shadow Trooper. I have some strips here and some other pieces that I want to start cutting out. First thing I want to point out is you should always use cut-safe gloves. These are cut-safe gloves that are level 5 that are good when you're using razor blades or other blades so that you don't accidentally cut your hands. You can see here on my finger I got a couple little cuts and little things. You want to make sure you're wearing these at all times just so you don't get any cuts or nicks on your hands while you're using the sharp tools. Basically what I'm going to be using today is an X-Acto knife. I use a brand new blade I just put on so that it's as sharp as possible, and a utility razor blade, and I try to use the carbide edge ones that last a little longer. They're a little more expensive, but they tend to last and be able to do cuts. I should be able to get through all the cuts I have to do with just the one blade for today, and then if it looks like it's getting a few nicks or it looks like it's getting a little worn, I can switch to something else. Now the first thing I like to start off doing whenever I'm doing new armor is you get pieces like this, which are just sheets that have a number of other smaller pieces in them. I keep a little bin handy and I start cutting this down so that I can start more detail cutting some of the pieces. What I'm going to use today is a Dremel to initially cut out the pieces, and then I'm going to do the actual detail cuts with the razor blade, usually the X-Acto and sometimes the utility knife. Now I don't like to use the Dremel. Some people do use the Dremel for the entire thing. They'll go like this and they'll cut through the piece and they'll cut right through it and right up on the edge. I tend not to like to do that. When you're using the wheel, it tends to generate a lot of heat, and sometimes it melts the plastic a little and doesn't give you a clean edge. You get a much cleaner edge when you're using a razor blade and just snapping it and then going back over it with some sandpaper. So let me just quickly cut out a few parts. I like to cut them out of these pieces before I make the final cuts, and that way I don't accidentally cut something else while I'm trying to cut out a different piece. So I'm going to hold this down with my hand here. I'm going to increase the speed a little. First piece off. Now for these other pieces I might be able to do a cut with a razor blade. I would like to get these edges. Whenever it's a corner like this, it's hard when you cut with a razor blade because then you can't just snap it. So what I'm going to do is cut off the edge here all the way down just to get rid of that so that it's easier to cut and do the other side as well. That piece off. Take that and I'm going to throw in my little bin here. I like to save some of the extra scraps just for later in case I do need to do any kind of filler or anything for any part of the armor that might get damaged. Now again, I'm going to do this now. You might have noticed there might have been a little smoke. Again, when you're using the Dremel, you'll see you'll get some of these curly little things. These little curly things are sometimes due to the heat That's again why I don't like to use the Dremel to cut out the pieces, because you don't get a clean edge. It's very hard to keep it steady. It's very hard to work with. But it is good to just trim out, do a rough trim of some of the bigger pieces so that you can go back over with a razor blade and do the more fine cuts. So now we got it more flat. This will make it a lot easier. As I cut the pieces out, I can easily just snap the plastic and easily get it off. Let me get some of this crap out again. Okay. It's always good to have, you can see here I have a cutting board. This way you don't cut through or scratch up the armor when you're cutting on like a wood surface or another surface. This surface stays pretty smooth and soft so that when you put the armor on it, you're not going to get scratches. So you can try to keep it as clean as possible as you're doing the cuts. This is the other button that could be used. I think this is for more of a sand trooper. So we're not even going to use this piece. I'm just going to put this to the side. We do need these buttons for the chest, these caps for the belt, and this other button piece for the chest as well. Okay, now for this, I'm going to, with the X-Acto knife, I'm going to carefully cut right along the edge, all around, and then I'm going to go over it 3 or 4 times so that then eventually I can snap it. To do that, you just start lightly. It's always good to leave a little meat on there, like you see here, so that I can have something to snap. And if you can't get it with your finger, you can always use like even those pliers or other pliers to get it off. So usually I go over 3 or 4 times, so I'll go like this and make a straight cut straight down on the line I'm planning to use here. I do it lightly the first time, and now I'm going to do it again, that same line. I'm going to dig in a little more with my hands, and then I'm going to go over it again. And then I'm going to go over it again. So just don't rush. Don't try to press too hard. You want to be accurate, so go over it 3 or 4 times with a little more pressure each time as you get a groove there so that the blade doesn't pop out. And I think that one should do it. Let's see. Yeah, that'll give. So then when you start to see it give, you just go and try to snap it. And you'll see it's pretty smooth, but not perfectly smooth. I'm going to go over this with sandpaper or with a belt sander and make sure that it's perfectly smooth when I do the final cut. But you can see already it's looking pretty good. That's already a pretty nice cut there, just by going over it carefully. So now I'm going to do the same thing. Now I could cut this piece out, which I might do. Again, I don't like doing a lot of pieces at once because as I'm manipulating it, I might scratch some of the other pieces. So I am going to use the utility knife and cut this piece out, so that I can then put this aside and then work on these parts later. So I'm going to just make a quick cut right down, leave myself a little meat here so I can do some snapping. I'm going to cut right here. And this time I am using a little more pressure because I'm not as concerned with being straight. I just want to get this piece separate from the other pieces. And now I'm going to go right back in that same groove. A little harder this time. And already that should be enough with the utility knife to crack that and just take that part off. So I'm going to put this part over to the side as I do a little more detailed work on the button piece here. Again, I like to use the X-Acto for this because it's a little more accurate, a little sharper. It does take a little more time because you got to do it 3 or 4 times, but I think it comes out a lot nicer. You get a much nicer edge. So again, I'm going to start right from the edge of here, and I'm going to cut. I'm going to try to get as close to that curve as I can so that I can get it right at the bottom of the curve. Right to the bottom. And then I'm going to go over that again. I'm going to go over it again. Again, keep your fingers out of the way. Make sure you're wearing your gloves. And again, goggles as well. As I was doing the Dremel, there was a lot of pieces flying around, so you want to make sure you're wearing your goggles as well. Okay, that was 4 times. I think that's going to be enough. Let's see if we can get it to break cleanly. There we go. And you'll see you get a couple little pieces there. Again, that can be taken care of with some sandpaper after the fact. I'm going to bend it, snap it, rip it off. Put that piece on the side. This one's not quite as good, so I'm going to run over it just with my edge of my other utility blade, just like this, get some of those extra pieces just to shape it a little. Again, I'm not that concerned because I'm going to go back over this with a sandpaper and possibly a belt sander to make sure it's perfectly level and perfectly straight before I apply it to the chest piece, the abdomen piece. Okay, not bad. Okay. Okay, that's going to need some sanding, but not too bad. It's nice and straight. It's just some extra material here that once I sand it off, I think it should be fine. I'll give it one more nick here just to get that little burr off of there. Okay, that's much better. Okay, now we're going to do the top and bottom quick. I'm going to use the X-Acto. And that's once. Twice. 3 times. The third time I use a little more force. And the 4th time I'm going to use a lot more force. Sometimes you'll even get through the whole thing, but you don't necessarily have to do that. Okay, let's see. That breaks right off. It's a pretty good cut. You'll see the edges are very sharp. I wouldn't worry about that. Again, we're going to go over this with sandpaper and with a sander. It's going to be fine when we get it all done. We just want to get the actual piece free and then do the detailing from there. Okay, now this one's a little more not as distinct, but I'm going to go right to the bottom of the rounded part and go straight down. Two. 3, 4. Okay, that should break easy. There we go. Snaps right off. Piece aside. Okay, now we got a pretty good ab button piece. Just needs a little work on the edges. Do some sanding when we're all done. We also have some clippers. I have some scissors I can use. One thing I'd like to recommend to folks is these are Cutco scissors. They're very expensive, but for doing stuff like this and cutting ABS plastic, and you'll see this when I do the cover strips for the legs and for the forearms and biceps. These are absolutely incredible. The little corners that you have to do on the cover strips, you can do with these scissors without even blinking. In one cut because they're so strong. They're ridiculous. They're Cutco scissors. I think they run for like $70, but I've been using them for years for this type of work. There's also these smaller snip scissors that you can use that are good for little teeny cuts. So if you want to just do a little trimming, you can always use these to just trim off little burrs and little edges without using a razor blade, just to go like that and snip off some little extra pieces. Okay, and that's looking pretty good to start with. Again, we're going to go back and sand this. I'm going to put this aside and I'm going to take out this plate. I'm not going to worry too much about the button pieces for the belt right now because I'm going to do those at a later time. And as I did before, I want to separate this piece from these so that I don't scratch them up as I'm trying to cut this out. So I'm going to cut right down here just as straight as I can to give us some meat here to be able to snap it. So I'll do a pretty straight line. That's one. With this, again, I could probably do 3 without using too much force. 2, 3. There we go. That'll snap right off. I'll put that aside. And I'll do the same thing I did with the other button piece with my X-Acto on this one. I'm going to find that bottom edge, and I'm going to try to go straight across and then do it 3 times. I try to hold this very tight with my fingers out of the way and try to be as accurate as possible as I follow that line. I kind of let the blade follow the edge as I give it a little pressure. Okay, now I'm going to go back over it again. A little more pressure. Kind of get a groove there. Go over it again. And go over it one more time. This time using a lot more pressure. Okay, there we go. I'll snap that off. That should snap off pretty easily. Pretty decent edge, not too bad. Again, I'm going to be cutting, I'm going to be sanding this and finishing it, so I'm not going to be too concerned with any little pieces that are left there. Okay, pretty good, pretty good. Okay, let's go to the next piece here. I'll do 4. This one might be a little hard to pop. And when you get that, you can use some needle nose pliers or some other pliers. Just grab it and then start pulling it, and then it'll snap right off. There you go. We got it right off. I'll leave those handy because these other pieces might not have a lot of meat either. Okay. Two, 3, 4. There we go. This one I should be able to pop. There we go. Pop that off. And now we have this last piece. That one I think I even got on 3. Yep. There we go. Now again, there's going to be some corners. They're very sharp now. We want to round them. You can just use these scissors or the razor blade to trim it a little bit more. And again, we're going to take care of this mostly with sanding at the end. So I'm not too concerned with any burrs or any little things on the corners right now. But these are not finished. These are just like preliminary cuts to get them in a state that we can actually finish them off. Okay, so I'm going to put this over the side. We're not going to cut out this piece. I might as well go ahead and just cut out these 3. Again, I don't like to use multiple at the same time just because I might accidentally cut one of them. So I will cut this along here. Isolate that one, and I'll isolate these 2. Okay, it's basically the same procedure again. I try to find that line, and I press the X-Acto right against where the ridge is, and I start from the edge, and I work my way in here. All the way down. For this one, because it's so small, I'm just going to do the whole thing. So now I'm going to do the next ridge here, right to the edge. And do the next one. And the last one. Okay, now I'll crack that open. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, again, you get those corners. You can use the little snipping scissors to do that. And again, not too concerned. I'm going to go over this with sandpaper. I'm probably going to take off almost that whole ridge because this is going to lay pretty flat on the belt, and it really hides the rivets that hold the belt to the canvas piece. So I'm not going to be too concerned with that right now. I just want to get it isolated. Okay, so now I'll do the next one. Same procedure again. You see, I'm doing it at least 3 times each time. And sometimes even 4th one if I don't think I went deep enough. Okay, let's pop that out. Scissors, get the corners. This makes it easier when you're sanding, just so you know where the end is. Okay, I got that cap. Put that aside, and then we'll do the last one. And then once we're done with that, I'll start with the cover strips, and then we'll see what else you want to get going with today. Now, with some of the other parts, you'll notice when I do them, I will make a pencil line and use the X-Acto in the same method, but while I'm holding the part, and that's a little more tricky. And you'll see that in a future episode. Now, if this is a little too much of an edge, I'm going to go right, I'm going to start about here. That should be enough for me to still pull it off. Okay, so I'll snap that one, and then these will pop right off. Again, if the scraps are big enough, I'll save them, but these little scraps I'll probably just chuck. Get my scissors, take off the corners. Okay, now it's at this point when your workspace has a lot of junk on it, a lot of garbage, a lot of stuff, you do want to start cleaning up a little bit. You don't want this stuff to scratch your other good parts that you might be working on. And if you don't need these parts, I'm going to put these ABS pieces in my separate ABS bin. Again, I sometimes refer back to that in case I need a few little pieces of ABS for a project or for repair. I'll keep some of that ABS handy. And for the other stuff, keep a vac handy. try to get up all this stuff. This stuff is really sticking to my gloves. Let me take off my gloves quick. My goodness, that's sticky. That's sticking to my gloves a lot. Okay, let me get this piece. And again, you'll see, let me just demonstrate over here. You'll see all the stuff from the Dremel. Again, that's why I don't like to use the Dremel unless I have to, just to do rough cuts, because it does kind of melt the plastic as it cuts, and you'll see that ridge there. And you don't want that in your final pieces. You want to use a razor blade to do most of the cuts. Okay, let me just get my vacuum, do a quick cleanup before I start doing some of the strips. And again, you want to keep everything clean, because you don't want to get scratches and stuff on the armor. Your enemy is scratches, so you want to keep a clean work area so that you can do that. Okay, and the next thing we're going to talk about quick is the cover strips. The cover strips you're going to need for your legs, for your shins, for your forearms and your biceps, and you want to make sure you cut them in the right sizes. Now, Anovos came out with a guide when they came out with their Stormtrooper, and UK's Wrath I want to give a shout out to. He included this with his Shadow Trooper building guide, and it basically goes over the shins, that the cover strips you're going to need. And when you get an armor from a maker, this armor is actually from Walt's Trooper Factory. When you get it, they're going to give you a couple of strips like this that you're going to use, and you'll be like, what is all this stuff? Well, this is the material you're going to use for your cover strips. And you try to find pieces that are in pretty good shape. You find out which edge you want to use for your front. Like this one's a little scratched, so I'm probably going to use this as the front. And then I take a marker and I mark it. If this is the front, and I'm using a silver Sharpie. This is what I'm going to use as my front. And just some basic rules. You're going to need a couple of different strips in different sizes. The general rule of thumb for most TK builds, whether it be a Shadow Trooper or a regular TK, is how many strips you need and what sizes. In general, you'll need ones that are 15 centimeters wide. You'll need 8 of them for the biceps and for the forearms, and you'll need 6 for the thighs and the front of the shins, and then you'll need 2 25 centimeter strips for the back, where you're going to put the Velcro or the hook and loop closure system in the back of the shins. So basically it's 8 at 15, 6 at 20, and 2 at 25. Now you don't have to remember that, because luckily there is this chart that you can use that's included with the Anovos instructions. Again, UK's Wrath has this on his Shadow Trooper build, and that's what I'll be using as a guide. Now again, you take the strip that you're looking for, and you'll notice if I put this up with a line, it's not straight. Some people just take these, measure out 15, and then start cutting. You never want to do that, because these strips are rarely straight to begin with. You're going to get stuck having to make 2 cuts, one on each side, to cut your own strips. I've already cut one just as an example. This was one I did earlier. That's a 20 millimeter one. So the 20 millimeter one is going to be for my thighs or the fronts of my shins, fronts of my shins. And I cut this on both sides. I cut one side and I cut the other side. I'm going to make this side the front. And this is going to be much longer than what I need. The longest one you're going to need is going to be 18 inches, which is probably on the front of your thighs. So I wouldn't worry too much about the size. When you get them, they're a little bigger than that. And I'll just cut it down to about 19 inches or so, so I have a little breathing room to cut those little corners off. So for the next one I'm going to do a 15 centimeter one. And what you want to do is get a good ruler that has centimeters on it. And I'm sorry, millimeters. And you want to make a 15 millimeter mark on both sides. So I want to go from here to right here. That would be 15 millimeters. Or 1.5 centimeters. And then I'm going to use my ruler. I'm going to make a line down the entire strip. Actually, let me mark it on this side as well so I get it straight. Oh, see that's not going to work because there's some defects in this particular piece. See this curve? So I'm going to have to go more in the middle. So let me do that again. These are not going to work. I'm going to have to go more in the middle to try to get a nice piece right in the middle that's a good size. So let's go from here. And that seems to miss all the other stuff down there. Unfortunately, the pencil is going to be a little hard to see on the black, but I can see it. There's enough contrast that I can see it. I'm going to move that down. Make sure that lines up. Straight. Okay, and then I'm going to go 15 millimeters from that. Make sure it lines up properly. That looks about right. And again, it can be a little larger because we are going to use some sandpaper and sand this stuff down at the end. Okay, and I'm going to continue that line on right to the edge of the strip. Again, you see that this is going almost completely across from the strip, but that's okay. And that's one way you can do it. You can mark it into the strip like this. The other thing you can do is take a strip that you have that's maybe a little smaller. Let me find one that's a little smaller here, because this is going to be for the 15 millimeter strips. Let's see how straight this one is. Not so great. Let's see. This one's a little better, but still not great. So for this one, what I'm going to do is just take my big ruler and I'm going to just cut a straight line and then work off that one and make the 15 millimeters off that straight line. Okay, so I'm just going to pick a straight line here. Leave enough meat that you can pop it off, and keep in mind you're going to have to do the same on the other side. So let's make, we got to get a straight line out of, you see that little curve there? I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to go right up to the edge here, draw a line. Continue that down to the end. And it's probably going to go off, and that's fine because we're not going to need this whole strip. We're only going to need probably a piece of this. There, until it goes off. Boom, it goes off. Okay, and I'm going to cut that out. Again, put on your gloves. Make sure you're wearing your safety gloves. You don't want to get nicks and cuts cutting into plastic if you don't need to. I'm putting on both my gloves. And I'm going to keep the ruler here and use my utility knife for this because you need a little more pressure when getting through this. It's pretty thick and you want to make sure you use some constant pressure. The hardest part is actually keeping down the ruler and not getting out of the track, so I'm going to be very careful as I do it. Again, do the first one kind of lightly, and then you can go back heavier with the second, third, and fourth cut. See, I'm getting a little out of track there. Let me try to get back in track against the thing here. Okay. Again, if you're a little off, it's fine. You can take care of that with some sandpaper later and sand it out. Back over it again. A little more pressure this time. Over it again. And this time I'm using a lot more pressure. I'm going to use my thumb on this thing here to push down a little harder. Keeping that track. Okay, and that should be enough. Now, because we don't have a lot of meat here, I might not be able to get it, and then I'll use my needle nose pliers and make sure I can help crack it and get it started. Let's see if we can get this cracking. There we go. There we go. I'll do that along the whole edge just to make sure. There we go. These are very thick strips. These are, I think, the thickest strips I've ever worked with, which is both a good and a bad thing here. Actually, I'm going to go over it again because it still is not giving. The ruler back on and do it a little more, a little deeper. I think there's a little thicker than I anticipated. A little more pressure. There we go. Okay, let's see if that gets a little better. Yeah, that's a little easier now. Usually it's a lot easier than this. This one I don't think I cut deep enough. I'm going to have to do better on the next one. Again, I like to usually leave a lot more plastic because it makes it a lot easier. I was just trying to get a nice, clean, straight edge because these are not straight at all. There we go. I should be able to get that off now. Sheesh, this one's really not giving. Okay, we'll try to do a little deeper on the next one. Okay, we got that off. Okay, now that edge is pretty darn straight. I'm going to run over it with the blade just a little bit. Just make sure I get some burrs and make sure it's pretty straight. Okay, not bad. Some sandpaper will take care of that. Now let's do the other side. Now the other side's the more critical side. We want to make sure that we get it exactly the 15 millimeters the whole way down and make as clean of a cut as possible. So I'm going to measure exactly 15 from the edge. My pencil. I'm going to make another point like halfway down to make sure I'm meeting that same point. I'll do another one a little further down to make sure I'm meeting that same point again. And another one down here to make sure at the other end I'm still at that 15 millimeter. And you can see that's pretty skinny, and that's what the ones look like on your forearms and biceps, is about that thickness, which is pretty skinny. And this way I will have a lot of meat on the other side to snap the plastic a little easier, I think, than I had trouble with. Let's work that out with the pencil. Again, you can go a little bigger because you are going to do some sanding. Make sure to follow that the whole way down. Oh, that's a little crooked. I'll make sure we're following that. Okay. I'm going to put the ruler right there. And what I want to do is I want to cut from this direction. I want to cut this side because I want to snap it towards me. So I'm going to put the ruler on the part that I don't want to cut and cut the opposite side the whole way down. And hold that very tightly. Get this and start the cut. And again, start off easy. Just do it so you get a little track built up, and then go in harder and harder and harder as you go each time. And I should have a bigger ruler. I might have to get a bigger ruler. Again, you don't have to make it this long because the maximum you're going to need is 18 inches. So we might even want to trim off the bottom here, which I'll probably do right now. You see this whole piece here is useless, so I'm just going to go like this and snap that part off. Okay, now we got the first cut in there. I want to do another one. And keep in mind, you're going to have to do this 8 times, so I'm just showing you one, but the same procedure 8 times for these biceps and forearms, 6 times for the thighs and the front of the shins, and then just 2 more times for the backs of the shins. There we go, that's pretty darn good. And with this one, because the forearms and the biceps are so small, I might actually get 2 out of this one. So before you cut them all, make sure your sizes, you might actually have enough after just a couple of cuts. Okay. Now I'm putting a little more pressure with my thumb. I'm trying to get a little deeper in that track. Now some people can do this freehand. I really can't. I want to make sure I don't slip, I don't miss. Now that I got a little more of a track, I'm going to really hit it and press down with my thumb and try to get a little more action in there so I can snap it off very easily. Again, now that I got a track, I can pretty much hold it steady and just stay in that track as I put more pressure downward. Okay, I think because of our experience with that last one, the last one I tried was a little tough. I'm going to go one more time. There we go. Okay, now let's see if we can snap it. Now this is the part we want. Let's see if we can snap it. Ah, there we go. Oh, it's so satisfying when it actually does give the whole way. Again, these strips are very thick. I think these are actually thicker than my TK when I built my TK. Snap that back. Very nice. That's a very decent piece. Little bump over here, we can get that out with some sandpaper, but really this piece right here would be perfect for the bicep. We might even get a second piece for the other half of the bicep, and then we just cut, you know, six or seven more of these to make sure we have enough. This part here I'm going to again trim down, and again the sandpaper later on we can get that down to a reasonable level. Okay, now with the extra piece I have here, unfortunately it's probably not going to be usable. Let me just see, because it does have a nice edge on it. I might actually be able to get another fifth now. Maybe with some sanding, I might even be able to recover this piece if I were to trim it. But I'm just going to concentrate on this piece right now. So on the bottom of this I'm going to write 15. So I know it's the 15 centimeter one, even though it's easy to tell, just so I know which one is which. And if you have to get that off, you could use some goof off and just get that off. But this will be my first piece that I use for that. So I got a 20 and I got a 15. And I'll go from there and see what other ones I need to cut as we move on. And just some other tools that I'm using here you might not recognize. This is an Architect ruler. I do like to use these sometimes as well. If I'm making smaller cuts, I can push this down and use my full weight to like push down or to hold this as I'm cutting. So this is going to be very useful when we're, it's made of aluminum and it's very sturdy. You can use this when you're cutting your forearms or some other pieces when you want to get a straight line on like an edge. It's really good to push down and hold it down. Again, I'm going to keep my scrap here and throw that at my scrap heap. Now let me show you some of the other pieces. Let me grab another piece to show. Some of the other things we'll be doing as we go on. These are our forearm pieces. These come pretty much rough trimmed, and these are the parts I'm talking about that I'm going to mark out. For this, you want to leave a little bit of a return edge. So I'm going to mark out with a pencil a line. Again, it's very hard on this black with the pencil, but you can kind of see it. You mark out about 1/8 of an inch, so you try and keep that on there so you have a little bit of return edge on there. And I like to do this before I actually do the X-Acto. So I'm just going over it with this, and then I go back with the X-Acto and I carefully carve that line, and then carve it again and carve it again. Do it 3 or 4 times, and then you crack that off and break it off. Again, I hate these extra pieces, so I might use, before I start anything, I might use the Dremel and just shave these edges off, because I find them very hard to work with when you're trying to make a straight cut. It's much easier to do it like on the side of the table like this and have it with the ruler and be able to go and make a nice cut. It's very hard when you have this extra piece sticking out and you might make a mistake. So I might get rid of some of these pieces before I trim these out. The other piece that we're going to have to cut out are the ears, and I think we'll end with that today. I think I had just enough time to cut these out. And again, I don't like to cut as I'm doing with all the ears. Now we only need 2 ears, but they give you 4 because sometimes you can screw them up. Sometimes you might want a slightly different shape for your helmet, depending on what kind of helmet you have. So I'm going to cut out all of these so I have them and have them ready when I get to the helmet piece. And again, for these I'm going to make a rough cut just to separate them out. So that I don't interfere with each one of these as I'm doing my cuts on each one of these. And as you see, when you're doing just a rough cut, you can just do it really hard and just crack it and throw it. But you don't want to do that when you're actually doing the fine cuts, because you want to make it at the edge a little nicer and get it a little cleaner. Now for these, you do have to cut pieces off here, and what I do use for that is the Dremel with one of these heads, these sanding heads. You can use it to shape the inside of there, and that's what I'll probably use with my Dremel. But you want to get this piece of plastic off of here first, because you don't need any of this. This whole plastic piece is completely unnecessary. And I'll show you what they look like on a completed helmet here. Hold on. Just to show you what they look like on a completed helmet. This is a completed Shadow Trooper helmet, and you'll see what I'm talking about. These are the earpieces, and you're going to cut out this piece, and then you're going to shape the space where this tube is going to go. And that's really more of an art form. That you do after the fact when you figure out exactly how the helmet fits together, how your tubes fit together, before you go ahead and do the ear carving. You don't do any of that until that last final step. You want to leave that till the end. So that's that ear. And you can see I'm going to do it just get the shape of it, and then I'm going to do that final tuning later with the Dremel tool. Okay, so let's do this. We'll do one. And this I'll probably do freehand, and I'll show you what I do to try to break it when you do the break. You can't really break it when it's around corners, so you have to make lines, and I'll show you kind of that method. I can probably get this in one piece, so I'm going to do this first. I'm going to cut right from the edge. Let's cut straight down and across. Again, using a little bit of pressure, and then a little more pressure the next time, and the next time, and the next time, until I get through the whole thing. Now I'm going to crack off. So for a straight line, you can easily do that. I'm going to do that for here. I'm going to actually make a line from that point out. I might even do it with the utility knife to get a little more depth here. And this way, when I cut this piece, I can just crack it right off. So let's do another straight line. Any straight lines you try to do first, because it's easier that way. Follow that line right down the edge. Again, constant pressure as you're going. Oh, that one I missed a little, but I'm going to go back in the track. Again, that's why you want to do some practice ones first. Okay, now this I should be able to break right off. Let's see. Yep, there we go. Let's snap that off. Again, that one's very rough, but I'm not too concerned because this whole area, again, I'm going to carve into that for the tube stripe. So it's not going to make much difference. This piece here is eventually going to go. Okay, now we got a little burr here. I'm going to use my scissors. Give that a little trim. And if these don't cut it, I'm going to use my bigger Cutco scissors. Let's see, now I got it. There we go. Cut that little ridge off. Okay. And I see another straight line here I could probably do, so I'm going to cut really deep here. And I'm going to cut a straight line. Okay, and this should pop out, let's see. Yeah, not deep enough, we'll do a little more. There we go, pop that right out. Now the hardest thing to do is the curve. And you could do it with the X-Acto. You can go over it a couple of times and you can try to pop it out and then make lines. I'm going to try to do it with the scissors, and if these scissors don't cut it, I might use the other scissors. These scissors have a curve that's the opposite of this bell, so I might be able to just go like this and just cut around. And again, this can be kind of rough because you're going to go back over this with some sandpaper and some sanding. just little teeny cuts as you go around. Now I don't like to use the scissors again, and you'll see why, because the cuts are very rough. But again, I'm going to shave that off, and that's probably better than I would have done with the X-Acto. Now again, this part I'm not too concerned with because I'm going to be shaving that off when I do the final cut. So I'm just going to stop this here. I'm making a cut, and I'm going to snap that off. And then I want to just take care of this one piece. And I can either do that with this, or I could just cut it off. Let me just see, I'll use my big Cutco scissors for that. Just to trim this last piece off here. Again, these are curves, so I'm trying to follow the curve with the curve of the scissors. Okay, and again, that's a very rough cut. I still left a little stuff here. It doesn't matter because I'm going to cut into that when I actually do the shaping for the tubes. And I'm going to take off these edges here when I do the sanding and finishing of this. One tool that I do use a lot of, and I can show you a little demonstration of that quick, just to show you what I do to finish the parts, is you can sit here with sandpaper and scrape and scrape and scrape, or you can use like a reciprocal sander, belt sander type machine, which I'm going to use right now, just to give you a demonstration of how much quicker that is when you do that. Let me quickly hook this up. Now I usually keep a 60 or 80 grit sandpaper on here. And again, you should wear safety gloves. Actually, when I use the sander, I actually also wear work gloves because you can get a little nicks and some other things from the belt sander as well. You don't want it to rub up against anything. I'm going to put on my work gloves. You can see there, that leaves an incredible finish, and it saved me 10 minutes of scraping it on sandpaper. So a reciprocal sander like that is incredible to quickly get through a job like that and quickly get them sanded. Just be careful because they will take off a lot of material very quickly. depending on the grit that you're using on the strip as well. And you still should go over it by hand with a piece of sandpaper and just make sure you get every piece. I also use very frequently, and I'll show you here, some of these sanding sponges. And these are great when you're just trying to shape something. This is an 80 grit sanding sponge. And I keep these handy for when I'm just doing little fixes on something, or I want to just get rid of a burr on the edge. I'll use a sanding sponge, and that'll take off some extra pieces. But when you want to do some heavy sanding and some sanding across an entire surface, electric sander like that is actually a real time saver. Okay, well that's it for today. That's some basic trimming of some of the auxiliary parts. Again, we're going to get back to trimming some of the other parts like the forearms, the shoulder bells, and the legs. That's a little more complicated. Again, you want to cut, leave a little bit of a return edge on some of the pieces, and then you want to cut here and leave enough for the cover strip. And we'll get into that as we get these more finished and as we have more time to go over some more details. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today, and we'll get back to it and finish up the rest of our ears here, and then come back next time and do the forearms and maybe start on the legs. Thanks everybody. See you later.